I'm really pleased to welcome all of you to our first webinar in this year in 2023. We are the Ukrainian chapter, regional chapter of the European Association of Science Editors. This webinar is devoted to retraction in academic journals. This issue is very well addressed crucial problems in academic publishing. I would say the process of retraction helps editors respond effectively in cases where essential errors are discovered in published articles during post-publication period. It involves retractions of the article from publication after a thorough investigation. Retraction is very rare in Ukrainian academic publishing, and I'm happy to start this webinar to share by sharing best practices with co-author of the EASE Standard Retraction Form, Dr. Hervé Maisonneuve from Université de Lyon, France, and EASE member, and Dr. Evelyne Decullier. It's a great pleasure to share the translation of the form in Ukrainian, done by members of our chapter. I hope they will join us and say a few words. They will speak also today. We are also delighted to welcome Dr. Ivan Oransky, co-founder of Retraction Watch, as our special guest. During the webinar, we are going to discuss guidelines, proper behavior, and other things. We encourage you to join the discussion after the speeches and share your comments and issues. Dear Joan, thank you very much for joining us today for introductory remarks. Joan Marsh from the Lancet, the past president of EASE.
Thank you, Iryna. So welcome everyone. On behalf of EASE, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to this seminar for the Ukrainian chapter, which is a very active chapter, beautifully led. And it's great to see people joining from within Ukraine, and we hope you're all safe, and from other countries around the world. And we wish you all the best, obviously, for coming months. So the retraction form, you're going to hear about it from its originators, the people who produced it. So Hervé Maisonneuve and Evelyne Decullier. So they were doing research and realized that we needed to standardize this. And this is something that EASE really wants to do, and we lead on. So seeing places where editorial practices can be standardized and harmonized, both for the convenience of authors, so that they can expect the same things wherever they publish, and then also to facilitate academic research, because if people want to look at how retractions are managed, we'll have the same wording throughout. So it's really good that it's been translated into Ukrainian, and we hope that you will all adopt it in your journals. So from that, I'm going to hand back to Iryna, and hope you all enjoy the seminar.
Thank you very much, Joan. So I want to start from the very brief introduction and a few remarks about our survey. We have a total of 30 answers. 19 respondents are managing editors of academic journals in Ukraine, while authors of Ukrainian journals. We have experienced editors among us, 22 of them with 5 and more years of practice, 4 editors with 2 till 5 years of experience, and 4 beginners. 22 respondents have never experienced retraction in Ukrainian journal, while 8 respondents have. I hope to hear the experience today at our webinar. The main question about the essence of retraction received varied responses. 7 respondents answer that it refers to the withdrawal of an article at any stage of publication by authors, while 2 respondents answered that it refers to a change to an article that the author wished to publish at any time after acceptance. The correct answer, which was about post-publication and the taking back of a published article due to essential errors, was answered correctly by 21 respondents. The most important issue is the absence of rules on retraction among Ukrainian journals, and I hope we can work together to fill these gaps.
It's a real honor to be with all of you today, and our thoughts and best wishes are with all of you, regardless of where you are in the world. I'm, as was mentioned, I'm Ivan Oransky. I'm the co-founder of Retraction Watch. Excuse me. I do some other things. Retraction Watch is a volunteer activity, but I do have a job, which is in this wonderful office here at the Simons Foundation, unrelated to my Retraction Watch work. So I wanted to give you a brief. I'm going to try and be fairly brief so that we can have some discussion today. I think that my panelists would agree that is the most useful thing to do. And to get your questions and to have a conversation and critiques, frankly, of the work that we all do. But I wanted to start, and I had a nice introduction into what a retraction is. Iryna shared the survey results, and I'm happy to report that it sounds as though most of the respondents were correct, which is that retraction means that for some reason, a paper that is in the literature should no longer be considered reliable. Now, I'm going to get into some of the reasons why a paper might be retracted and why papers often are retracted, but that's the core reason. So about 2/3 of the time, as I'll discuss, that's because of something related to misconduct. But it's not always misconduct, and people can retract for various reasons. But at the end of the day, what it means is you should not trust this paper. There's something unreliable about it. Again, that may be about the data, it may be about the conclusions, it may be about fakery, in other words, fake data, but you should not trust this paper, and you shouldn't cite it without noting that it's been retracted. So, I'll talk about all of those issues, but I wanted to make sure everyone at least understood what I mean when I say retraction, which is the fairly standard definition. I don't think that is, all that controversial. So let me start by telling you a little bit about why we, and when I say we, Adam Marcus is my co-founder at Retraction Watch, why we launched Retraction Watch. So this was in 2010, so not quite 13 years ago, in August of 2010. We've been doing it since then with various other staff as we've had funding for them. But Adam had broken a rather large story about someone named Scott Rubin. Scott Rubin was an anesthesiologist, a pain management researcher. He was studying drugs and other treatments for pain management here in the U.S. And he, there was just one little problem with his research, which is that he was actually making up all of the data. So all of the patients that he claimed to be seeing in his hospital and in his research were fake. He made them up. So that was a problem. And so the editors, and this is where I think it's really important for all of you as journal editors to sort of be reminded of the power that you have. The editors of the journals, after they found out that this had happened because one of the hospitals told them, they had done an investigation and found the problem, all the editors got together and said, we have a problem, not only in this case. And by the way, so Scott Rubin retracted 25 papers, or had 25 papers retracted. That is not a record by any stretch. He went to federal prison here in the United States, so jail, prison, for charges related to the scientific misconduct. He also paid back some money to the funders. But all the journal editors in anesthesiology realized they had a problem. So not only in this case, but they actually went and said, we need to retract these papers. They also then started looking at other researchers, many of whom are in Japan. I'm going to get back to that in a moment. They happen to be in Japan. It's almost a coincidence. And they said to the universities and the medical centers, if you don't send us a proper investigation within 12 months, we're going to retract all these papers because we have serious questions about it and nobody's doing what they're supposed to do. That's the power of scientific editors, of journal editors. And I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost because journals are often owned by large multinational conglomerates that have actually, even though they don't like to talk about it, taken away a lot of the power from individual editors who are supposed to be in charge. And they've actually, so what we've seen over time is, again, different interplay, but I thought that was important to remind you all of. So we decided to launch Retraction Watch because I was so impressed with Adam's work in breaking this big story about Scott Rubin. And what we noticed, and so I thought, oh, there's all these great these retractions happening that we can report about. We're journalists, that's what we like to do. And I also noticed that the retraction notices, and this is very relevant to the great work that Evelyne and Hervé have done. The retraction notices really were not very helpful. They did not provide a lot of information, or they were actually wrong. And so we thought that's a problem for science. So let's start this blog about it, which we did. One of the things, though, that we noticed very quickly was that we could not keep up with all the retractions. So we thought at the time in 2010 that there were about, 30 or 40 retractions per year. It turns out that there were about 400 retractions from journals that year. Many more if you include paper, conference papers and abstracts and things like that. So they were in the thousands, in fact. And so we decided that the world really needed a retraction database. The reason is that when you go to typical databases, here in the States, we have, of course, PubMed, which many people use, Medline, Web of Science, Crossref, Scopus. Those are all missing a lot of retractions. So if you go by what is in, any of those, you will miss most retractions. We have now almost 40,000 retractions in our database. You can go there at retractiondatabase.org and search by anything. We actually have, we are not limited to English in our database. We actually built the capacity to include all characters. So in other words, not just Latin characters, but Cyrillic, for example, as well as, Chinese, different dialects, obviously, of Chinese and other languages. So you can go and search. We have about 40,000. Other, PubMed has only about 13 or 14,000. Crossref has even fewer. So we have many, many more retractions. And that's because publishers often are not transmitting the metadata. This is another role for editors to insist that their publishers do what they're supposed to do, which is send the metadata. In other words, let the indices, let Crossref, let PubMed, let Scopus, let Web of Science know that a paper's been retracted. I'm going to get to why that's a problem in a little while, but I wanted to mention that now. But again, you can go to the Retraction Watch database and learn whatever you'd like. Let me just list, I'm not going to go through these in the interest of time. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, or even many of them, but these are some of the common reasons for retraction. They're not in particular order, and each year the percentage of each of these changes, but these are the common reasons. Again, the fake data, fake peer reviews. This you may have read about often in connection with paper mills, which are at the bottom of the slide, and that is when people manage to peer review their own papers because they submit fake email addresses to editors. So if you're working at a journal that asks for suggested peer reviewers, be aware that some people will try to include fake email addresses. So always check the email address of a suggested peer reviewer, and make sure it's not just someone making up a Gmail address or something else where they're not that person. They're essentially committing identity theft, but it's also it's fraudulent in terms of peer review. You've heard probably a lot about image manipulation. I'm going to talk about the sleuths who are finding a lot of these issues. Legal reasons, a lot of attorneys, lawyers get involved in these cases. Authorship issues, people who should be on a paper, they're not, or they shouldn't be on a paper, and they are. These are all problems that have led to retraction, but I'll leave, again, that way you have it also in Ukrainian so you can see the text. So I mentioned that we couldn't keep up with retractions, and in fact, that remains true, although we're much better at it because we've been doing this so long. The retractions are still quite rare. So they happen, about 5,000, there were about 5,000 retractions last year. That's up from about 40, as I mentioned, in the year 2000. So the rate of retraction has gone up, even if you take into account the rate of numbers of papers being published. So the number of retractions has gone up more than 100-fold. So 2 orders of magnitude. The number of papers since 2000 has probably gone up, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 times, maybe even 10 times, but not 100 times. And so what this tells you is that, again, the rate is going up. Now, it's still quite rare, though. So if you look on the left axis, right, the y-axis, the rate of retraction is still under 0.1%. So in other words, about 1 in 1,000 papers per year is being retracted. Now, we think the number should be much higher. We think the number should probably be about 2% of the literature. Others say it should be even higher than that. I can discuss why we think that, as if it would be of interest. But interest of time, I'll move on. But anyway, the rate of retraction has clearly increased and continues to increase. The reason you see a spike in 2015, or an apparent spike, is that this is the year the papers were published, not the year they were retracted. And there's a lag, as I'll show you. The retractions take a long time because publishers take too long to do this. And that has led to this lag, so that we think that this rate will just actually keep going like this. But I just wanted to mention that as well. So let me who retracts the most? So this is, we keep a leaderboard. This is on our website at retractionwatch.com. We keep a leaderboard of the people with the most retractions in the world. So remember, I mentioned 25 is not a record. He's not even on the top 30. There are 2 things to note about this. One is that there's a higher than number of Japanese surnames than you might expect if you were just by law of averages. And that's because, as I mentioned, anesthesiologists really, in a great way, anesthesiology editors took these issues seriously. And it just so happens there are a lot of anesthesiologists in Japan publishing case reports. These are not sort of full clinical trials or anything like that. And so they're here. They also, some of them tend to publish together. So some of these are actually being counted twice in some ways. So the fact that there are a lot of Japanese surnames is a bit of an artifact. What we have noticed also, though, is that so here's the top 10. If you go all the way to 30, which is where we stop for no particular reason, there are no women on this list. So in other words, men are retracting far more papers per person, right, than women are. This is even true if you sort of account for the number of men in positions where they're authoring papers, senior authorship, et cetera. Men are still 9 times more likely to retract papers for fraud. I don't really know what to make of that, but I do want to mention it because it's a striking finding without any, clear explanation so far. Okay, so back to this idea of how long they take. And again, as journal editors, I hope that you will take this constructively and sort of, think through how you could improve this process, because one of the things that we have seen consistently is, again, how long retractions take. So on average, retractions take about 3 years from publication date to retraction. That doesn't tell you everything. What's really important is how long is it from the time someone raises a question, the authors, an outside party, a university, a funding agency, from then until, the retraction. And that is what we're trying to catalog here. So very briefly, and I'm happy to talk about our methodology if it's of interest later, but we have learned in many cases when someone brought the allegation, or even when a university requested retraction. And yet it still took 2 years, or in one case, even 3 years, for the journal to do anything. And I would ask why that is. And no one has ever given me a very good explanation. It's one thing, these investigations can take a long time. They're very complicated. People do hire lawyers to push back. I understand all that. But these are cases where the university has already done an investigation, and they're officially asking for the retraction because of something they found in that investigation. And I really don't understand. And this is where editors can play such a key role, because I know what happens is that publishers tell the editors, essentially, this is out of your hands now. At many of the major publishers, we are going to take care of this. And they don't, or they take forever, or their attorneys push back. This is not good for the scientific literature. And so To give you some examples, this is a paper that was published now, I guess, 3.5, almost 4 years ago. A group of authors who have done a lot to clean up the literature. In fact, they found a lot of what's on the leaderboard, the people on the leaderboard. They tried to get, they contacted journals. Less than half of the journals had even communicated decisions. In other words, told them what they were going to do within a year. What is taking so long? And why? Okay, why is correcting the literature not a priority for these journals? Because that's all you can say about it. It is not really, intellectually sort of honest to sort of say that this is a priority and yet not do anything after a year. Remember, during that time, citations are growing. The impact factor of the journal grows. And so journal editors and publishers they have an incentive not to retract. And we need to fix that if we want the literature to be clean, if we want it to be trustworthy. Those are the ones that sometimes eventually get retracted. In these cases, which I'm going to show you briefly, journal editors have done, essentially nothing with most of what they were contacted about. So in this case, 24 papers, the editors only got back to the authors here of this Nature commentary in 8 of the cases, so 1/3. Elizabeth Bick, who's the first author of this and who did all the work, she actually looked at 20,000 different papers. She found that 2% of them, and this is part of why I go to 2% when I talk about how many papers should be retracted, 2% of them had, images that exhibited features suggestive of deliberate manipulation. That is grounds for retraction. Elizabeth Bick has a tremendous track record, and yet only 20 or 30% of the papers that she has flagged have ever been corrected or retracted. Only 20 or 30%. So what are journal editors doing with the rest? What are publishers doing with the rest? I'm not quite sure. So what if papers actually are retracted? Here's another role that journal editors can play. When papers are retracted, they should no longer be cited as if they hadn't been retracted. In other words, they should no longer be reliable. And yet, 95% of the time, and Alison Obrightis is the last author on this paper, is our researcher at Retraction Watch, 95% of the time, papers that are retracted continue to be cited as if they were not retracted. We don't understand why that should be unless authors, journal editors, publishers are not checking retractions. They're not checking reference lists. Part of the reason and part of the problem with checking reference lists right now is that, as I mentioned before, publishers are not sending word of retraction to the relevant indexes, right? Whether it's PubMed, et cetera, the ones I mentioned. This is just one example in the mental health literature. 40% of the time, when these 2 library researchers who've done a lot of work on retractions went and looked, 40% of the time, the papers were not marked as retracted. So you can see why, even if someone did try and check, they would not know that the paper is retracted. So it may make sense that these continue to be cited. I have some maybe good news for you, if you would like. If you use any of these products, so EndNote, Zotero, Papers, LibKey Nomad, which is a discovery program, we just came online with Edifix also. I don't know if any of you use Edifix from Adapon and Wiley. All of these products, so these are bibliographic software, reference databases, libraries. They ingest our database, they license our database, and you get an automatic alert whenever anything in your library is retracted. You don't have to do anything. It's just part of their service now because they license our database. We're really happy about this, and we would strongly recommend you use a product that uses a reliable source of retractions, which is our database, instead of missing all of them if they only use PubMed or some other source, because you'll miss 2/3 of retractions. So we're very happy about that automated service. I'd encourage it. And the last just minute or two, because I want to leave plenty of time here for Hervé and Evelyne, and also for discussion. I just want to give you a sense of why we think, or why we're pretty sure that retractions are on the rise. And that is more people looking for problems in the literature. It is not necessarily that there is more misconduct in the literature. That may be the case, but that's very hard to prove, and we don't have any evidence of that. What we do know is that more people are looking. So, some of you may be familiar with PubPeer, pubpeer.com. Full disclosure, I'm a volunteer on their board of directors. That's a site where you can leave comments about any paper you want, anything that has a DOI or a PubMed ID. And so that has led to a lot of retractions. Elizabeth Bick, who I mentioned, posts comments there now. She has critiques of papers. This has led to a lot of retractions. You may have read, I don't know if it's made its way around the world, but the president of Stanford, Marquess Levine, is under, there are allegations of misconduct in some of his papers. That all started on PubPeer back in 2015. So this is really playing a big role, and I would encourage you to look at it. And also, as journal editors, you can sign up. You can actually subscribe to get alerts, excuse me, whenever a paper in your journal is critiqued, and then you can at least know about it when it happens on pubpeer.com. You can sign up for that as well. The sleuths. So I don't know how well that word translates, but these are sort of, detectives, if you will, right? This is not an entire list, but Elizabeth Bick's on it. Others are on it. All of these people are working almost exclusively for free. They don't do any, very few of them are paid for their work, which I think is a problem. And so we should support this work. So and some look for plagiarism, some look for duplication, some look for image manipulation, others look for statistical problems. These are the people doing the work that many of you as journal editors may hear from. And they're all around the world, but they're all doing various different things, which is really interesting. Some of them are actually working, they're in the lab and they found problems. And whistleblowers, right, often face a lot of sanction. They're the ones who get punished when something happens. Thankfully, in some cases, it's not happening. Like this case where a grad student found a really serious problem. That's a good thing that people are actually, someone wrote a Nature, never mind Retraction Watch, we wrote about this, but someone wrote a piece in Nature about this in his lab. He was the principal investigator. He was the head of the lab, and he championed this, which is really another great thing. Another thing that's happening that, again, you might want to think this is Czars is, I did not write that headline. I apologize for that. It's really not a good headline. But the important thing here, this is a piece that Adam and I wrote for Stat several years ago now. Journal editors and publishers are hiring full-time research integrity managers. So they're actually looking at all these allegations. That's costly. It takes resources, but the large publishers definitely can afford it. Plus One has hired 3, I think, maybe more now. These are people with PhDs, people who can actually look at all these problems. Those journals are taking care of things. They are actually cleaning up the literature. They have a higher retraction rate, which we think is a good thing. Some journals are publishing peer reviews, which I think is also a good thing. And it also can help to actually create trust by encouraging people to, to understand what actually happened before something was published, especially if it's retracted. You can see what went wrong. That's useful information, but also what went right when a paper, maybe people did raise questions, and why didn't the editors sort of act on those? And then finally, again, I just want to give another example of someone who, at risk to herself, at risk to her career, came forward about problems because it was a much larger story involving Jonathan Pruitt. You may have heard about and what have you. I just want to share with you that this person ended up getting tenure despite retracting a paper because it was the right thing to do. And we really need to encourage doing the right thing, which we have a whole category on the website about that. And that's how we're going to move forward, not hiding problems, not pretending they don't exist, not ignoring them, but that's really what we should encourage. I would encourage any of you to get in touch with me. This is how to find me. We have a daily email that some of you may be subscribed to that we can keep up, not just with Retraction Watch, but other issues that we find of interest, and that goes out every morning, or for you, it would go out every early afternoon, U.S. time, early morning here. And that's how to contact us. Happy to speak to anyone and look forward to the other presentation as well as a conversation. So thank you. And, I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Ivan. It was very interesting. Good to hear. I'm using Zotero actually, so I'm happy to hear I will be notified. We have one question in question and answers, but I would perhaps ask the author to keep listening to other speakers, and then we can switch to discussion. And because the question is very relevant and very interesting about ChatGPT, so I think we will be happy to discuss this thing. And I'm happy to invite and to give this floor to Evelyne and Hervé. Thank you very much for this forum. You're welcome.
Just hello, bonjour. I am Hervé Maisonneuve. I am MD based in France, and we have done a lot of work around retraction with Evelyne. But Evelyne has done most of the work, so she will present now, and I'll be there for the discussion. Evelyne.
Sure.
Okay, I will try to share my screen. Hopefully, sorry. I am Evelyne Decullier. I work as a methodologist in the Lyon Public Hospital in France, as you can hear from my accents. I am interested in publication practice, and with Hervé, who is online, I have authored articles on retraction. And today I'm going to talk about the necessity of transparency for retraction. So I would like to start my talk by citing Richard Smith, who was at that time editor at the BMG, and he said, "Everybody makes mistakes, but not everybody admits them." With this citation, Richard Smith was evoking retraction, of course, which are a necessity for cleansing biomedical literature. He precised that retraction are a virtuous process and that journals should not be ashamed of publishing retraction. Next slide, please. Indeed, scientific community has a duty to keep scientific knowledge at a high level of truth. Before going further, I would just like to remind you what is a correct retraction, because I think it's very important to have all the information in mind. A correct retraction is when an article remains available online with a clear mention of the retraction, that's the figure in the middle of the slide, and a notice of retraction is also issued to explain the retraction. So a correct retraction is consisting in two parts, a retracted article and a notice of retraction. Next slide. I will not comment this slide too much, since Ivan already talked about the retraction trend, which has a rise, which is faster than the rise of publication. As Ivan already said, this phenomenon could be explained both by a rise of misconduct, but also by a better knowledge of retraction existence, and above all, by better tools to detect misconduct, especially plagiarism and image manipulation. Next slide, please. As for each new phenomenon, researchers then started to study it, and more especially, they investigated the reason for retraction, and the main categories were to distinguish between error and misconduct. An unexpected result of these studies was there was a non-negligible number of notices which did not explain at all the reason for retraction. From 5 to 18% of notices were not explicit. On the screen, you can see some example of this unexplicit notice with just a mention, this article has been withdrawn, and no further explanation. Next slide, please. Again, I won't comment this slide too much, since Ivan has already told about Retraction Watch, but it is a very rich source on information when you can find very much details about all investigation on retraction, and you can have more information that you can find on PubMed or other websites. Next slide, please. Once an article has been retracted, we are supposed to ignore it, as Ivan already said. But retraction may take quite a long time, and quite often papers continue to be cited even after the retraction has been published. Two kinds of citation can occur. Negative citation, mentioning the retraction itself or the low quality of the paper, or there could also be positive citation, validating the article and its conclusion despite the retraction. Ivan already gave you some figures, but here I will just mention the example of John Darcy, which has many retracted paper, and most of the citation of this paper after retraction were still considered as positive. So the issue of continued citation of retracted paper is so important that a project has been built around it. It's the title that is mentioned at the bottom of the slide. The project is called Reducing the Inadvertent Spread of Retracted Science, Shaping a Research and Implementation Agenda Project. It is directed by Jody Schneider. And if you are interested, there is a nice literature review gathering information on different aspects of retraction. But indeed, why is it so bad to continuing citing retracted paper? Next slide. It is bad because the results might be used for new research. In a study, Grantstein tried to estimate the number of patients put at risk due to retracted research. He found that more than 70,000 patients might have received treatment based on retracted data. And in most cases, the concerned data were related to fraud. From this example, one can easily understand why the statement of the reason for retraction is very important. This phenomenon has also incited COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, to publish specific guidelines in 2009, specifying that the reason of retraction should be present in the notice. Next slide. And with Hervé, we studied a cohort of retraction published in 2008, and we found that 9% of the notices did not provide any reason for the retraction. As a conclusion of this article, we recommended the use of a standard retraction form, and we have made a first draft of this form. Next slide. I think that's here. Yeah, there is a problem. Next slide. We'll go on the next one. It's not a problem. This form was discussed with COPE in 2014 and presented in the World Conference on Research Integrity in Rio de Janeiro in June 2015. Where nearly 80% of the 80 attendees found that the form was a good idea. This retraction form was designed to support editors when preparing a retraction notice, but also was designed to help researchers analyzing retraction. This form is made to be very simple and consists of tick boxes, and there is also space for supporting clarification. There is, of course, information of who is retracting the article and also the history of the retraction. That's on the screen. Next slide, please. Yes, yes, perfect. On the screen, you can see the main part of the form, which is, of course, the reason for retraction. Here, with Hervé, we have chosen to divide the reason into two columns. One for the reasons invalidating the results, such as data fabrication, and one for the reasons not invalidating the results, such as editorial reasons, authorship issues. As you can see, plagiarism and lack of ethical approval are in this column, despite their seriousness. This was a choice, since Hervé and myself think they do not threaten the truth nor the patient's safety. This choice could be considered in line with Richard Smith's vision, explaining that retraction should be reserved for studies that involve scientific misconduct and severe errors. Next slide, please. The use of a standard form is very convenient, but it also comes with some difficulties. For example, it could be very hard to distinguish between fraud and misconduct, and lawyers from journals might have some reluctance to tick fraud since it could lead to lawsuits. On the other side, we do think that having a clear statement could have also some beneficial effects. Indeed, retraction has a really negative connotation, and authors might be reluctant for making their error public. But if the retraction makes it clear that it's not fraud, but it's only error, maybe some of them would go more easily on making a retraction if it's public that it's okay that it was not a fraud. And also, it's just talking about ChatGPT. Maybe we should think about updating this form with new new reason for retraction, because there has been a lot of changes since the our first version of the form. Next slide, please. To end on a positive note, I would like to say that retraction practice have improved since the first studies. With Hervé, we conducted a new study to compare 2016 retraction to the first study. And we found a very high improvement with the reason of retraction available in nearly all notices, as well as a greater presence of the retraction mentioned on the original paper. Next slide. As we saw on the previous slide, notices are improving and visibility of retraction are also improving on PubMed, with the mention of retraction on the screen. But we need to do more, since, as Ivan said, it's not all retraction that are signaled on the PubMed. And we think that the next significant move will certainly come from the technologies which might help us to prevent from using retracted research. These tools should be used both by authors and publishers. Next slide, please. So some problems are solving, but new ones are also appearing. And here on the screen, you can see some questions addressed during a symposium on data publishing during the World Conference on Research Integrity in Cape Town last year. The one that most particularly concerns us is the one in blue. What should we do with shared data sets that are later retracted? So it's a new question, and since data sharing is relatively new, we will have to think about practical guidelines, notably on the retraction part for both authors and editors. Next slide. Lastly, I will come back again on the last question, because I think for myself it's very important, and I think maybe we could progress with this question. Should an authorship dispute, an honest error, data manipulation be treated the same way? As I said before, treating an honest error the same way as a fraud could discourage people from retracting. So maybe we should think about a new taxonomy which could acknowledge for both reliability and honesty. Thank you very much.
We have a few questions. It was really interesting. Unfortunately, I can't do this without you. So the first question, we're going to ChatGPT. Sorry.
Well, I saw the question. I wrote a short answer. The question is, would using ChatGPT and writing a paper be grounds for retraction? It depends if it's disclosed. It's sort of it's like a conflict of interest, and a lot of journals put out editorials early on when ChatGPT was first discussed a few months ago. They basically all said the same thing. They said two things. One, ChatGPT cannot be an author of a paper, a named author of a paper, because it can't take responsibility for what's in the paper. It isn't the person. It can't take any responsibility. The other is that if you use it to help yourself, in other words, to help write part of a paper or do any kind of work, literature search, etc., you should disclose it. So if you don't disclose it, then you're committing misrepresentation, and then editors can decide what to do. I will say, though, I want to be, people have gotten very concerned about ChatGPT, and that's fine. But I don't think we should begin to be distracted by ChatGPT at the exclusion of the core problems in the scientific literature, which existed long before ChatGPT and will continue to exist. For example, last week there was something about fake references that ChatGPT just made up, completely made up. That's a problem, but that's been happening. There's a paper from there's a fake paper that has been cited more than 1,000 times because it was a template reference. And people just didn't delete it, and then others copied and pasted it. So that happened years ago. Others have written about that. So let's not lose sight of the fact that all ChatGPT does is provide. Well, I should say the use of ChatGPT is simply, in many ways, a response to the real problem, which is the need to publish papers, which is the need to publish more and more papers, which is, the fact that there are not enough peer reviewers to do a good job, and not enough authors even to be doing what they claim they're doing. So those are the core problems. We need to think about ChatGPT, but the core problem is the whole infrastructure and the fact that publishers and universities and even authors the incentive is to publish more and more. That's what we need to worry about.
Thank you very much. Evelyne or Hervé, would you like to add something about ChatGPT?
No.
Yeah,
I agree.
Thank you very much. We have a few questions from one of the Ukrainian colleague, Serhiy Nazarovets, to host and panelist here in chat. It's actually addressed to Ivan, but anyway, retraction is a certain indication that editors and reviewers have not fulfilled their tasks, and some Ukrainian editors may find it tempting to simply not admit their mistakes. In this way, journals that use retractions may be seen by the public as inferior to journals that simply ignore accusation and suspicious. In your opinion, how can the Ukrainian scientific community reach out to the public to make them understand that retraction is better than ignoring? Very good question, actually.
It's a great question, but I think I would say that here in the United States, we have a saying that the cover-up is worse than the crime, right? So this referred first to Richard Nixon, who may remember. He was almost indicted, but now we've actually had a former president indicted. The cover-up is worse than the crime. In other words, if you continue to insist that there aren't any errors, and this was the great Richard Smith quote that Evelyne started with, if you continue to insist there are no errors, and then it becomes clear there are errors and misconduct, either honest errors or misconduct, that is when you lose trust. So it's very short-sighted to say, oh, well, we're just going to pretend it doesn't exist, because you can't pretend it doesn't exist. So that's the nature of things. And all you do, in terms of the public, I don't think it's necessary, or, it may be useful, not necessarily necessary, to go to them and say, we're correcting the record, isn't that great? Although that would be lovely. The real problem is when the public finds out, either because of honest error or honest actors or dishonest actors, that there are mistakes in the literature, what you do then is you've lost all trust. And we saw that happen during COVID, where people, published nonsense and then, it got retracted or it didn't get retracted. When it doesn't get retracted and pressure builds, that's when you lose trust. So I think it's just a short-term versus long-term discussion. The other thing I'll briefly say is that in terms of citations to the literature, it turns out that when you retract for honest error, you don't see a decline in your citations overall. When you retract for fraud, you do see a citation. This is well documented in the literature. And so, again, scientists understand this. So that actually is an argument for journals to, again, do the right thing.
And publishing retraction is also considered as a proof of quality of a journal, because a bad journal, low quality journals don't publish any retraction. So if a journal publish retraction, that's the proof that is a good journal with a quality process, a quality check, and that it admits its error.
Absolutely right. Please, dear Joan.
Yeah, I've got a question for Ivan, and I apologize if this has been covered and I missed it. Is there a way, so we've just had a paper submitted that was a complete duplication of a paper published in the Lancet. They just changed the names of the authors and everything else was identical. So we've rejected it. We've written to all the authors, not just the corresponding author, no response. We've written to the university, no response. Is there a way of flagging that? Because I just feel this paper is going to end up duplicated in the literature somewhere. And as editors and publishers, what can we do?
You can ignore your lawyers at Elsevier.
We haven't been through them. We've just done
Don't stop. Don't go to them. Announce it to the world.
Please do not ignore lawyers. We are absolutely fine.
Tell us about it. Tell the world about it. The problem is lawyers and publishers always say, don't do that. They say you subjecting yourself to lawsuits and everything else. That probably isn't even true, but it is the guiding principle. And so when people talk about blacklists of authors, which we know happen informally, publishers always say, oh, no, we couldn't do that because it's a problem. I think that's part of the problem. So, Joan, I'm delighted that you're, worried about this and want to see the word get out. And I would say, rise up, editors, and, do the right thing and let people know about it, because if you don't, you're right, it will simply be duplicated somewhere else, and then no one will retract it, or it'll take years. It's kind of funny though that sounds like they tried to duplicate a paper that was in another journal in the Lancet family with the Lancet. But this is how bad paper mills have become. It's probably a paper mill paper.
Thanks.
Yes, I am an ethics committee for a journal, and we have a lot of plagiarism. Let's say twice a month we see a plagiarism. We always write back to the authors and we copy the answer to the university president or the department. So we copy many times the answer.
Thank you very much. Ivan, I would just want to add your comment about answer about on question. It's very important to keep trust to the journal, and really it's important to behave. There is no idealic behavior or journals, so we just need to be very careful about and investigate all these cases. So I want to say thank you very much for this form. This form is very logically structured, and we can find the original source, the reason, the editor's activities all together, and we can imagine what happened, why, and how should we behave. So I want to share my screen one more time, and to say thank you very much to all who help us with the Ukrainian translation of this form. Taras Kotik, our is member of the Ukrainian Regional Chapter, and my vice head Marina Zhenchenko and Olga Dunayevskaya. Thank you very much for also translation of Ivan's slides. Thank you very much for this work, because I believe it will be also helpful for Ukrainian editors to understand clearly what should be done in this case, if some will some cases they will face with some cases of retraction. So one more question from our Ukrainian editor. May I read the question in chat? Because it's about Ukrainian journals and Ukrainian universities.
Yes, I just want to comment on this discussion about university leaders who are editors. I have been for 3 years research integrity officers at the Paris University, and few times it has been impossible to conduct any inquiries because one editor was on the board and he was at the university level vice president or something else. So you receive calls telling you, shut up, shut up, shut up. So it has been very, very difficult to do that. So it's happening let's say, quite often in France. It's the same than in Ukraine. So it's everywhere like that. It's my experience.
Thank you very much for sharing this experience, because really it's we can face it in Ukraine. So something like conflict of interest, because many of journals in Ukraine are published by universities, as you can see. At the same time, rectors, vice rectors, and administration, editors in chief, members of the editorial boards, and authors of the journal are very well known and each other and from one circle. So it's clear that the conflict of interest means that even if there are serious violation, retraction will be not possible in practice. Do you have any similar examples from developing countries, and how did the editors manage to solve these problems in these countries? Thank you, Hervé, for your answer. Maybe some other comments or feedbacks. How can the publisher inform the platform, Scopus, Web of Science, and other about the retraction properly?
Yes, I've answered that one.
Thank you very much for joining us
and
and for sharing.
You can all follow up. Please feel free. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And
thank you.
The
Please subscribe Retraction Watch. We all subscribe it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyne and Hervé. Sir, thank you very much for all participants.
Au revoir.
Bye bye.